Hi, my name's Paul Grogan, and in this video I'm going to be teaching you how to play Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, players take on the role of influential merchants at the end of the 19th century. You'll produce various commodities and transport them to storehouses in the harbour to be sold all over the world. Each round you will select a new card and 2 of the 6 dice that provide the crucial resources needed to win the game. You will use these resources to activate cards, gain commodities, and use your barge to deliver those commodities to the storehouses. All of these things will increase your prestige in the city, and the player with the most prestige at the end of the game wins. Thank you to Queen Games for sponsoring this video, but I also rely on the financial support of my Patreon campaign to keep the channel going. So if you want to support me directly and help me continue to make videos, you can do so by becoming one of my Patreon supporters at patreon.com/gamingrules. In this video, I'm going to be using the components for the classic version of the game. If you have the deluxe version, some of your components will be different. I'm also just going to be covering the rules for the base game with none of the expansions, so be sure to put any expansion components back in the box. Place the game board in the middle of the playing area. The city is divided into 6 districts based on the colour of the rooftops. Place all of the commodities in the bag, mix them up, and then draw them randomly from the bag, placing 1 on each block of buildings. Be careful not to cover over the resource icons on the board. Place the 12 dock workers in the bag, mix them up, and then draw 2 at a time, placing them on the docks in pairs, until all docks have workers. Make sure that both of the dock workers at any one dock are of a different colour, and that no dock worker is placed on the dock of its own colour. If that happens, just swap them around until it's okay. Place the 6 district tiles in the bag and mix them up. Then draw as many tiles from the bag as the number of players -1, placing them face up next to the game board. Place one of the unused district tiles face down next to the others. This shows the points available for the districts at the end of the game. Return the remaining tiles to the game box, they are not needed. Place the game round board nearby. Separate the cards into decks by the colour of their backs, shuffle each deck separately and place them face down on the matching coloured spaces. Take the green and the blue market tiles and mix each separately. Return 2 random tiles of each type to the game box without looking at them. Create a stack with the 6 blue tiles at the bottom and the 6 green tiles on top. Then take the top market tile and place it face up on the space below the stack. Place the game round tracker here with its window indicating round 1. Place the resource board nearby. Sort the resources by colour and place them on the matching coloured houses. The small cubes are worth 1 and the large cubes are worth 5. Place the 6 dice on their spaces. Separate the coins by value and place them as a supply here, along with the action markers and penalty tokens. Each player chooses a colour and takes the following components in that colour. A player board, a roundel composed of 2 parts, place the smaller turntable inside the larger base. 2 reference cards, 1 rowboat, 1 barge, 15 control crests, 1 Amstel disc, and a 100/200 point tile. Place your player board in front of you. Leave space above and below it for cards to be played. Place your control crests on your player board here. Take 1 coin from the supply and place it in your purse. Place your roundel next to your player board. Each player places their rowboat on the 0 space of the scoring track, and places their barge on the starting pier of the matching colour in the harbour. Take the Amstel discs for each player in the game and place them in a stack in a random order on the start space of the Amstel Canal. Draw 2 building cards, the ones with the blue backs, and place them nearby. Then draw a number of craftsmen, the ones with the green backs, equal to the number of players -1. So in a 4-player game, you have 2 buildings and 3 craftsmen. The player whose Amstel disc is at the bottom of the stack chooses one of these cards, takes it, and places it face up in one of the slots below their player board. Then the other players do the same, in the order of the discs from bottom to top. The remaining card is discarded to the discard pile here. Finally, in order of the Amstel discs from top to bottom, each player takes 1 resource cube of their choice from the supply board and places it in the number 1 segment of their roundel. Then, each player takes 2 resources that are the same colour and places them both in the number 2 segment. It is allowed to take the same colour resource as the single cube you took if you want to. When considering what cubes to take at the start of the game, take into account the card that you chose and possibly the positions of the commodities in the city. With setup complete, you're now ready to play the game. A game of Amsterdam is played over 12 rounds, tracked by this marker moving down from one round to the next. Each round is divided into 4 phases summarised on your reference cards. Phases 1 and 2 are on the front of the first card. On the other side of the card are some of the actions that you can perform in Phase 3. Your second card shows the other actions you can do in Phase 3 and then Phase 4. And the other side of the second card shows the end of game scoring. The aim of the game is to gain the most prestige, which you can do in a variety of different ways. A number in a shield indicates prestige, and I will refer to that as points for the rest of this video. At the start of a new round, new cards are revealed. Then, in turn order, each player must take a card and place it below their player board. Then the dice are rolled. Each player chooses 2 of those dice and takes a number of resources based on the number of pips and the colour of the dice chosen. The resources are placed in segments of your turntable. After taking your resources, rotate your turntable counterclockwise by 1 segment. Then move all resources in the segment with the arrow outside of the roundel. These are the resources that you have available to you this round. In Phase 3, players use their resources to perform a variety of actions, which include activating a card by spending the resources shown on the card to move it from below your player board to above your board. You can also use the ability of a previously activated building that can be used in Phase 3. You can take possession of a block of buildings, paying the cost shown, claiming the commodity, and placing one of your control crests. You can either sell the commodity immediately to the black market or place it on your board. Your commodities can be loaded onto your barge at one of the loading docks, and you can then move your barge around the harbour, possibly picking up dock workers and dropping them off for points. If you move your barge to a storehouse that wants the commodities you're carrying, you can gain points by unloading them. You can also advance up the Amstel Canal to move ahead in turn order and gaining points if you cross a bridge. And you can buy points at the market. At the end of the round, each player may keep at most 1 unused resource for the next round. The round marker is then moved to the next space and a new market tile is revealed. After 12 rounds, the game is over, and after final scoring, the player with the most points wins the game. At the start of the round, reveal the top 2 district cards and place them nearby. Then you reveal a number of buildings and craftsmen according to the number of players. In a 2-player game, reveal 1 of each. In a 4-player game, reveal 2 of each. In a 3-player game, on odd-numbered rounds, reveal 1 building and 2 craftsmen. And on even-numbered rounds, 2 buildings and 1 craftsman. This is summarised on your reference card. Then, in turn order based on the discs on the Amstel Canal, each player must take one of these cards and places it below their player board. You're limited to 5 cards below your board. If you take a 6th, you must take a penalty token and place it here. Penalty tokens will lose you points at the end of the game. And then you must discard one of those 6 cards, either the one you just took or an existing one, placing it on the discard pile and replacing it with the newly taken card. After all players have taken a card, the 1 card remaining is discarded. If you have any cards above your player board with abilities that can be used in Phase 1, you may use them now. For example, this ability means that you do not have to take a card this round. Before going on, I just wanted to talk a bit more about turn order. In the first round of the game, turn order is simply the order of the discs in the stack from top to bottom. However, during the game, players will be advancing their discs along the canal, and turn order is based on the order of these discs, with the player furthest ahead going first, then the next player, and so on. If there are multiple discs on the same space, tiebreaker is from top to bottom. So the turn order here is yellow, red, green, and then blue. And also, just before moving on, I wanted to mention something about choosing a card. I've already explained that having too many cards below your player board is bad, because if you get a 6th one, you get a penalty token. And I've also briefly mentioned that to activate a card and move it above your player board costs resources. And as you can see, some cards are expensive to activate. Be careful about taking too many expensive cards, as it can be quite difficult to activate all of them and you'll get penalty tokens. And at the end of the game, you gain 1 penalty token for each card below your player board. Sometimes you just want a cheap card, even if the card doesn't have an ability that is useful to you, just so that you can activate it. In Phase 2, you roll the dice and place them on the resource board. Then, in turn order, each player chooses any 2 dice. For each die chosen, take a number of resources equal to the number of pips on the die of the colour matching the die. For example, you could choose the orange and pink dice. You take 3 orange cubes and 4 pink cubes. You then place those resources in the corresponding segment of your roundel. So the 3 orange ones would go in the 3 segment and the 4 pink ones in the 4 segment. The dice you choose does not limit the choice that other players have. You don't remove the dice, you simply say, I'm going to use the orange and pink dice, and the next player could do the same if they wanted to. It's also possible for players to do this simultaneously, although there are times in the game where you might want to see what the player before you takes before making your choice. Note that from round 8 onwards, as shown on the round track, some dice are changed after they have been rolled. In round 8, you change every result of a 6 to a 1. In round 9, you change every result of a 5 or 6 to a 1, and so on. This is because there simply aren't enough rounds in the game. You can't take 5 brown cubes when there are only 3 rounds left, for example. After all players have taken their resources, each player rotates their turntable 1 segment counterclockwise. All of the resources now in the segment with the arrow are removed. These are the ones available to you for this round. And it won't happen in the first round of the game, but in later rounds, if you had a resource on your player board, you add that to the others. You cannot use any of the resources still on your turntable. If, after rotating, there are no resources in the segment with the arrow, you must take a penalty token. And note that this is done before adding any resource that you stored on your board, so you cannot avoid the penalty by saving a resource from the previous round. And if you have any cards above your player board with abilities that can be used in Phase 2, you may use them now. For example, the Glass Blower gains you 2 money for each die you chose with a value of 1. Choosing which dice can be a difficult one. Selecting dice with high values gets you more resources, but many rounds in the future. Sometimes you really need that 1 brown cube right now, so whilst selecting a brown 1 might seem inefficient, sometimes it's the right thing to do. In Phase 3, each player in turn order takes a turn where they spend as many resources as they want to, performing various actions summarised on the reference cards. At the end of the round, you can save 1 and only 1 cube for the next round, so you want to spend as many of them as you can. There are 2 types of actions. All of the ones on this card may be performed as many times as you want. However, the actions on this card may only be performed once per turn. The first action I wanted to explain was activating a card, which is the process where you move a card from below your player board to above it. Cards below your player board cannot be used until they are activated. To activate a card, pay the resources shown on the card from the ones available to you. Then, move the card from below your board to above your board. There is no limit to the number of cards you can have above your player board. If the card has a once per phase ability indicated by a number 1, 2 or 3, take an action marker and place it on your windmill. Some other cards depict an infinity icon, meaning that they have ongoing abilities, and other cards have a laurel wreath, meaning that they score points at the end of the game. Do not take action markers for either of these 2 types of cards. So, the number of action markers you have should always be equal to the number of cards with actions on them. You place an action marker on a card when you use the card, so this serves as a visual aid. If you have any action markers on your windmill, you know that you have cards that could be used. The second action to explain follows on nicely from the first, and that is using a card. During your turn, you may use any of the cards above your player board that depict Phase 3. To do so, place one of your action markers on the card and carry out its effect. As mentioned earlier, cards with infinity symbols never have action markers placed on them. They have a permanent effect on the game. Each card has a unique number, and all of the card abilities are fully explained in the addendum. I'll explain a few of the common ones now. The district cards all have abilities that allow you to spend a resource to gain something, in this case 1 point. Remember that resources can only be spent from those available to you this round and not the ones on your turntable. This ability means that if you currently have more victory points than all other players, you gain 1 more point. And this one means that when you use the market tile, which I'll explain later, you gain 1 resource of your choice, which you can spend this round. The next action to explain is taking possession of a block of buildings. You can only do this action once per turn. The city of Amsterdam is divided into 6 districts, each of which has 6 blocks of buildings, and each of those starts the game with a commodity on it. To perform this action, spend the resources depicted on the block. Remove the commodity and place one of your crests on the space. You can take control of any block on the board. You do not have to place your control markers next to each other. And once you control the block, it is yours for the rest of the game, and controlling blocks will get you points at the end of the game. I'll explain this more when I go through final scoring. You then have 2 choices for the commodity that you just took. One option is to immediately sell it to the black market. To do this, place the commodity on the matching space of the black market and either gain any 1 resource or 2 money as depicted here. Each commodity can only be sold to the black market once in the game, so if the space is occupied, the black market no longer wants any more of that commodity. Your other option is to place the commodity on your player board, and there's no limit to the number of commodities that you can store there. The next action to explain is loading commodities onto your barge. To do this, your barge must be in one of the 7 loading docks, which are indicated by the image of a crane. The pier where your barge starts is one of those. Then, move 1 or more of your commodities from your holding area to your barge space. There is no limit to the number of commodities you can have on your barge. Once you have commodities aboard your barge, you want to move your barge around the harbour to somewhere that wants those commodities, and you do this with the action Move Your Barge. To do this, spend any number of resources of any colour or colours and move your barge one space for each resource spent. Multiple barges may occupy the same space. To unload a commodity, your barge must be on the anchorage space of either a storehouse that wants the commodity or a warehouse which will accept any commodity. You then unload one or more matching commodities, placing each on an empty space and gaining the points covered over. Each storehouse wants 3 commodities of a specific type, and each warehouse only wants 1 commodity but of any type. For each commodity you deliver in rounds 1 to 7, you gain a fast delivery bonus, as shown on the round tracker. So in round 5, each commodity delivered is worth 3 additional points. Remember that most actions can be performed multiple times on your turn, so it's possible to move your barge to a dock, then take control of a block to gain a commodity, then load that commodity onto your barge, move your barge again, unload the commodity, and so on. Also, when you move your barge to a dock that has any dock workers, you may pick up one of those workers, placing it on your barge. When you do this, you gain 1 money that the dock worker gives you for safe passage. You can only pick up 1 dock worker per visit. If you wanted to pick up the second dock worker in the same turn, you would have to move away and then move back again. However, the limit only applies to each turn, so if you moved to a dock on one turn, picked up a dock worker, but then didn't move away, on the next turn you could pick the other one up. When your barge arrives at a dock matching the colour of a dock worker that you're transporting, place the dock worker on the topmost empty space of the magazine on the game board. Immediately gain the points printed on the space. The top 3 spaces can only have 1 dock worker each. The large space worth 3 points can have any number of dock workers. Note that the fast delivery bonus does not apply to dock workers, only commodities. After dropping off the dock worker, if you wanted to, you could pick one of the other dock workers up, gaining 1 money. Another action you can perform is advancing your Amstel disc on the canal. This is another action that you can only do once on your turn, but when you perform the action, you can move multiple spaces. The first space you move costs you 1 resource of any type, and each subsequent space costs you any 2 resources. Therefore, to move 2 spaces costs you 3 cubes. If you move onto a space with other discs, you place your disc on top. You are now ahead of them in turn order. If when moving your disc you move across a bridge, immediately score the points depicted. The last space of the canal is divided into 4 smaller spaces, each holding at most 1 disc. The first player to arrive at the end of the canal places their disc on the 1 space. They will be the first player in turn order for the rest of the game. All players who reach the end of the canal gain 10 points scored immediately. The next one to arrive puts their disc on the 2 space and so on. The final action to explain is another one that can only be done once per turn, and that is to trade at the market. Simply pay the amount of money shown to get the benefit depicted. This one, for example, is to spend 3 money to gain 5 points, whereas this one is to spend 4 money to gain 6 points and advance 1 space up the canal. A full explanation of all of the market tiles can be found in the addendum. After all players have taken their turns, there are a few steps to perform at the end of the round. This phase is skipped in the last round of the game. First, all players may store 1 unused resource on their player board for use in the next round. Any other unused resources are lost. Then, all players remove any action markers from cards used and place them back on their windmill. Advance the round marker to the next space, and finally, reveal a new market tile, placing it on top of the old one. The game ends after phase 3 of the 12th round. You skip phase 4 in the final round, and then you proceed to final scoring. First, each player gains 1 penalty token for each card still below their player board. Then, each player loses points based on how many penalty tokens they have, as shown on the reference card. Next, for each of your activated cards with laurel wreaths, score the points according to the card's effect. This one, for example, gains you 2 points for each bridge of the canal that your marker has crossed. Next, each player counts their largest group of connected crests in the city and scores 3 points for each crest in that group. A group can be connected across a bridge. For example, Red has placed a total of 7 crests, but their largest group is 5, so they score 15 points. Then, score each face-up district tile chosen at the start of the game. Players gain points as shown in the chart on the other district tile, which is based on the number of players in the game. The highest points are given to the player with the most crests in that district, then the next points to the player with the second most crests, and so on. If players are tied, add the points of the two positions and divide the total equally between the players, rounding down. For example, in the pink district, there is a tie for the most between blue and yellow. The points for first and second are added and shared, with each player scoring 6 points. Finally, add up your leftover commodities, dock workers, money and resources. Divide by 2, round down, and score that many points. The player with the most points wins. In case of a tie, the tied player further ahead on the Amstel Canal is the winner. Amsterdam comes with 4 expansions that you can introduce once you have played the base game a couple of times. And there's also a solo mode, which I'll be covering in a separate video. Check the link in the description or click on the little eye in the corner to take you to my solo playthrough video. And I've also done a full multiplayer playthrough video for the game too. Again, check the notes in the description for a link to that. I hope you found this video useful in learning how to play Amsterdam. Please give the video a like, leave me a comment and subscribe to the channel. And as mentioned earlier, I do rely on the support of my Patreon to keep the channel going. So if you are in a position to be able to do so, please visit patreon.com/gamingrules for exclusive access to the Gaming Rules community and some additional bonus content. Until next time, take care and thanks for watching.